The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a couple more minutes. I'm going to wait for a couple more people to get logged on here. Quite a few people had registered, and we're probably about halfway on. About half of the people are currently on the line. So I'm going to go ahead and wait just a couple more minutes before we get started. So thank you for your patience as we wait for some others to join us. Good afternoon for those of you just joining us. We are just going to wait until like another minute or so before we get started. We only have about a little bit over half of the number of individuals who registered. So I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes to see, 2 more minutes to see if people are able to get on and join us. All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get us started for the afternoon. I think people will still be joining us over the next couple of minutes, so I might just stop and repeat a couple of items that they'll need to know throughout the session. So thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about curriculum mapping and what great teachers need to know about their classes and programs. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, everyone's lines are muted today. That's just to eliminate any kind of background noise. I also know it is 12:30 your time. I am on the East Coast, so for anyone who wants to enjoy their lunch or an afternoon coffee, please feel free. We are going to be using a couple different pieces of functionality within GoToWebinar today. So I want to just take a brief second so that everyone can locate them. First and foremost, we're going to be using the question function. So if everyone can go ahead and locate the question function, it should be a part of your GoToWebinar kind of dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen. That's usually where it shows up. You don't have to chat anything in. I just want you to be able to locate it. We're also going to be using polls today. Those are going to kind of pop up on your screen as I launch them. And the third item that we're going to be looking at today is actually a handout, which is part of our activity. So you can find this handout in 2 places. First, if you pre-registered up until about probably like 5 minutes before the webinar, I did send it out over email just for ease of access. So it's either in your email from me, Jenna Ralicky, or you can also find it under handouts in the GoToWebinar. So again, underneath in your kind of GoToWebinar bar there is an area called handouts. It's going to say handouts 1 of 5. It's called Hometown University Curriculum Mapping example, and it is a Word document. We're not going to be using this until a little bit later on in the session, but just wanted to make you all aware of a couple of features that we're going to be leveraging within GoToWebinar today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We have quite a bit of content to get through. First and foremost, I will take a second to introduce myself. My name is Jenna Ralicky, and I am an enterprise consultant on the Enterprise and Emerging Products team here at Campus Labs. We are located in Buffalo, New York, and if you can believe it, it actually is snowing this afternoon. I believe about 2 weeks ago, we did our session on formative assessment. It was snowing then, and it seems to be snowing again today. I don't know if it's just Friday bad luck, but we're hoping for a warm up in the next couple of weeks here. I have been with Campus Labs for 7 years. I have really been focused around data analytics. I have been focused around data governance. I focus a lot of my work around holistic student learning. So I'm excited to be working with you all today. And I was excited to have worked with you all on formative assessment. So that was me if you joined us a couple of weeks ago as well. I also have my master's in higher education and student affairs administration and have spent some time at a local college on campus at a local college in the area here in Buffalo. So again, really excited to be working with you all today. Feel free, as you have questions, to chat them in using that question feature. I usually stop throughout the session 2 or 3 times to address any questions that have come in. Now, before I get too far, I know that last week, some individuals were having issues with their audio. So one thing I do want to bring up, if you're having audio issues this week, under the little audio drop down, again, part of that GoToWebinar bar, there's an area where if your computer audio for some reason is not working, you can go ahead and use that phone call feature. I realize this is incredibly unhelpful suddenly because if you couldn't hear me, you wouldn't hear me saying that. So I'm going to actually send out a really quick chat saying that if you're having issues hearing me. Okay, thank you for your patience as I just sent that out. I know GoToWebinar has seen a very high uptake in different institutions using this program, not just institutions, but businesses using this program. So they have been experiencing some lag in at certain times of the day. So I did just kind of want to let you all know that. I think we shouldn't be having any issues as of yet, which makes me pretty happy. So moving us right along. Oh, I should mention that is my dog Crunch. If you hear any barking in the background, we are working from home, much like you all. So I have a couple of little rascals running around. So hopefully they won't be too much of an interruption today. For our session overview today, we're going to do a really quick overview and review of relevant terms. Then we're going to take a deep dive into curriculum alignment, and then we're going to go through a curriculum mapping activity. So some of the relevant terms I'm sure y'all are going to be really familiar with. Things like learning outcomes, program outcomes. I'm going to spend about a minute on each one. I just want to make sure we all have that same base level understanding. Now, before we get too far today, I'm going to launch our first poll question. So what's going to happen is on your screen, a poll question is going to come up, and all you have to do is respond with your answer. The question is, do your course outcomes currently align to your program outcomes? And feel free to take a second to respond. And this is not, you're not going to be tested or anything. So if you're not sure or they don't, that is perfectly okay to just respond however you see fit in the moment. It looks like currently we have about 60% saying yes. We have the rest of the percentage, so that other 40% is kind of in that unsure bucket. So we're going to be talking through exactly what curriculum alignment and curriculum mapping is. So by the end of the session today, I'm hopeful that we're all going to at least have the tools we need in order to set up those alignments appropriately within our program. So thank you all for participating in that first poll. I'm going to go ahead and close it. So now you're kind of familiar with that polling function that's going to come up during our curriculum mapping activity in a little while. Learning outcomes for today's session. Super, brief. Describe 2 benefits of curriculum alignment, articulate the basis of creating a curriculum map, describe 2 benefits of curriculum alignment for faculty members. So for those of you who are joining us, I see a couple people are just logging in. Just let you all know your lines are muted. You can feel free to respond to the polls that will pop up on your screen. And then additionally, if you have questions, you can feel free to chat them in. Now, this is going to be really familiar, especially for anyone who was in our last session on formative assessment. I always like to start off sessions like this by orienting us to where curriculum alignment or whatever the topic is fits within the larger cycle for continuous improvement. So I know when we're thinking and we're looking at continuous improvement cycle in our last session that we focused a lot on the different areas that we are within, right? So plan, do, check, act. It's called continuous improvement. It's also called the assessment cycle, lots of different names. I want you to take a second, consume this cycle, and I want you to think for a minute about where curriculum alignment really falls within this process or where it aligns. We're going to come back to this a little bit later. We're going to think about how we are planning our curriculum alignments. We're going to think about the measures and the assessments that go into our curriculum alignments. We're going to talk about analyzing our curriculum mapping. And then we're going to talk about what to do with all of it. So if when you looked at this, you thought, well, it probably kind of fits a little bit in each one of these areas, you're absolutely right. Another framework I want to take a quick look at is the NIOLA transparency framework. So for those of you who aren't familiar with NILOA, it's the National Institution for Learning Outcome Assessment. And the part of the transparency framework that I'd like to highlight is the student learning outcome statement. So that's going to be in our upper left-hand corner. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is transparency is a very large part of student learning outcomes. So when we're thinking about transparency and SLOs, student learning outcome statements should be specific to the institutional level or the program level or the course level. They should be, clearly expressed and understandable by multiple audiences, not just students, but your colleagues, your not just at your institution, but colleagues, or not just within your program, but outside of your program as well. Alumni, parents, anyone kind of combing through materials on your site, thinking about, where their next step is for their education. These should be prominently posted or linked to in multiple places across your websites. So again, this is all about transparency, which is a really big part of curriculum mapping, and student learning outcomes. So they should also be updated regularly to reflect current outcomes. So if things are changing, your curriculum map should be updated. Your course outcomes, your program outcomes, as they are updated, so should your external resources. And then, of course, always thinking about being receptive to feedback or comments on the quality of those outcomes and really the information that you're providing. So really quick chat about transparency, which plays a really big role in our conversation today. Now, I know we have touched on a few different terms and concepts already. I'm going to take just a brief 4 or 5 minutes to make sure that we're all on the same page and we all have the same basic level understanding of the terms that we've reviewed and the concepts that are going to be woven into this session. So again, not going to spend a ton of time here, but outcomes assessment. When we are talking about curriculum alignment and curriculum mapping, we are talking about the alignment of outcomes. So want to do a really quick overview here. Outcomes assessment clarifies divisional and departmental fit. It really identifies where within the institution a program or a department or a course or a section is fitting within that larger vision and mission of the institution. It clarifies to not only students but the other constituents what a learner can expect to gain from the program or the course or that learning experience. Outcomes assessment provides different kinds of data and evidence about services. It really does move beyond satisfaction and tracking, and it focuses on the idea of what a student is able to do as a result of a learning experience. And then of course we know that it links student affairs and academic affairs. So really thinking about the curricular and the co-curricular. We're not going to really spend a ton of time talking about the co-curricular today. I do have one example of a student learning outcome framework that I'm going to present and just chat about with you briefly. Now, program outcomes. So program outcomes should be focused. So this means that program level outcomes should not be too specific as that it would require, a really long list of program outcomes in order to encompass the breadth and the depth of a learning that is going to occur within any one of your given programs. So we want them to be focused, but we also want them to be broad, because we really narrow in on specific topics within those course learning outcomes, which we'll talk about in a second. So your program outcomes should be central to the program to be called, they should be able to be recalled easily. So it should really be the basis of discussion in program meetings, in retreats, in any of your reporting. Faculty, staff, and students should have easy access to the program outcomes. They should be shared intentionally, not just with students, but also, again, posted internally and externally for consumption. Again, that transparency piece. They should also be well represented. So they should be introduced and assessed in early courses. They should be referred to as, again, those broad objectives of a degree program or a certificate program like at San Diego Continuing Ed. So really we want to think about how faculty, staff, student have access, can consume this information, and also how it is essential to the program's core. Learning outcomes. So learning outcomes, I think we all know, because based on a lot of your feedback, y'all have course outcomes and program outcomes. So again, just doing a bit of a review. Learning outcomes are student focused. They focus on learning resulting from an activity rather than the actual activity itself. They are general enough to capture important learning, but clear and specific enough to be measurable. They really should focus on aspects of learning that will in essence, develop and endure, but that can be assessed in some form now. And then, of course, learning outcomes are going to help us to align to our programs, to our departments, and then, of course, to our higher institution. So just dissecting course learning outcomes briefly here, they should always follow the ABCD method, meaning that each student learning outcome, so a course learning outcome, should include the audience, the behavior, the condition, and the degree. Again, not going to spend a ton of time here, but they should also consider and look at and include Bloom's taxonomy, and they should encompass the 3 M's of writing a learning outcome. So this is thinking about it being meaningful, the outcome being manageable, and if it is measurable. I think the manageable and the measurable are always the most difficult, right? If you were in the session 2 weeks ago on formative assessment, we walked through each one of these bullet points a little bit more in depth. So happy to share any previous resources after the fact today for anyone who needs a little bit more information in those 3 categories. Diving a tiny bit further into Bloom's. Bloom's is really going to come into play here when we're thinking about curriculum mapping and our desired degree of learning, which we're going to talk through in a couple of minutes. So essentially, when we're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, we are really wanting to think about what is the action item that we are going to put into play? What is the assessment method? What is the activity? And whatever it is, it should be a reflection of the learning that we are seeking to assess. The lower level here, remembering, is the lowest level, then going up to the top level, creating. So these different levels of Bloom's taxonomy mean different levels of thinking, right? Remembering is just recalling information, but creating is putting information together in a really innovative ways. 2 different levels of learning, not one, depending on the course and the program, not one is better than the other. It really depends on the context of which you are looking at these items. But I would say that keep in mind that when we're thinking about different levels of learning, associating the right types of assessments, which you can use by, engaging with Bloom's taxonomy and those different verbs. Moving us right along. So whether we're assessing learning or we're learning outcomes or program outcomes, we need to first determine our outcomes, and then we need to figure out, well, how are we going to assess them? What are our methods going to be? So we have already strategized and we have already specified exactly what our students should be taking away from all of our efforts. So the next step is determining our methods. Before we get too far ahead now, I know we did a little bit of a review of our program outcomes, our learning outcomes, and now I want to lay a little bit more foundation on some important terms that are going to come up as we continue to work through this. So first and foremost, I want to talk through something quickly. So the NILOA, who is a institute that we talked about a couple minutes ago. So again, the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. They conducted a survey of the field in 2018. In that study, NILOA found that there has been an increase of awareness of the range of places that learning happens within institutions. So for example, they have found that it's not just within the curriculum, but it's also work within things like work study positions or on-campus work positions, co-curricular offerings, things like community engagement, just to name a few. But NILOA has also found that institutions are seeing an increase in the need to not only document, but also align learning across an entire institution or an entire campus. Interestingly enough, it was reported that of the provosts who participated in this survey, 77% of them indicated that their institutions are currently involved in curriculum mapping of some sort of some kind. Interestingly enough, only 50% of the provosts that participated indicated that all programs have learning outcomes and that those outcomes align throughout the institution. So we are really going to be taking a deep dive now into curriculum mapping and what all of this means. I want to start off by talking through what is cohesive curriculum. So essentially, in the plainest of terms, a cohesive curriculum is designed intentionally to provide learners the opportunity to not only learn, but also develop, apply, analyze, and synthesize increasingly complex skills throughout their time in a program. Now, if you're following along with me, a lot of those terms I just used correlate exactly to our Bloom's taxonomy map. So you're going to start to see and draw a lot of comparisons and probably have some aha moments about how all of the terms that we just reviewed are connected into this larger cohesive curriculum and the idea of aligning an entire institution's framework. Other things that we're going to talk through. So desired degree of learning. So essentially, indicating a degree of learning or the desired degree of learning is a tool that can be used in conjunction with curriculum mapping and also outcome statements. So learning outcomes are a way to measure, what is being taught, while the desired degree of learning indicates more the level of skill students are expected to achieve for that specific student learning outcome. So you're looking at 3 different levels. There are other alternatives to these levels of learning. I'm going to look at a couple on the next slide. These are the 3 that we kind of practice and preach, if you will, here at Campus Labs. So these are the ones that I'm going to kind of focus on and dive a little bit deeper into. So first and foremost, introduced. So this degree of learning is intended to introduce basic knowledge. So it's introducing facts, concepts, ideas that support that learning outcome. The student is really most often kind of shown material for the first time and then, might require explicit guidance for application. Again, lower level of Bloom's taxonomy here. I hope you're kind of pulling all of this together. Reinforced. So this degree of learning is intended to strengthen and support the development of knowledge. Again, that's relevant to a specific learning outcome. This will further develop the skills necessary for the future optimal achievement of that learning outcome. So students will gain, and I forwarded my slides very quickly here. Apologies on that. So here for reinforced, again, students will gain a full understanding of the material, but are still going to require probably assistance or are not as comfortable with some of the more challenging applications. That's where mastered comes in. So this degree of learning shows the full achievement of the outcome. So this involves the integration of knowledge and skills and attitudes that are going to be necessary for the complete accomplishment of a specific student learning outcome. So here, students are expected to have a full understanding of the material and will be able to apply it independently. That's that mastered level. Again, when we're thinking about the levels of Bloom's taxonomy, each one of these kind of correlates to those different levels. Now, these are some alternate levels of learning. These we also see come up even in some of my examples that I'll share today. These are also used. So basic, intermediate, advanced, novice, intermediate, mastery, introduced, practice, demonstrated, emerging, development, proficient. Now, I do want to pause here and say not one of these is better than another. They are just simply a lot of times based on preference. Now, thinking about curriculum alignment and mapping, and are they the same? Now, a lot of times these 2 words are used interchangeably. And admittedly, I sometimes use them interchangeably as well. So I will own that up front. But I also want to take a second to distinguish the difference between the 2. So what is curriculum alignment? So the act of curriculum alignment helps to ensure that your program, as well as your course curriculum, are designed to give students enough opportunity to achieve key outcomes. Furthermore, curriculum alignment involves clarifying the relationship between what students do in their courses and what faculty expect them to learn. It helps faculty to identify gaps when they analyze the alignment between curriculum and learning objectives or outcomes. And it is an exercise that often prompts faculty to make changes to improve student learning opportunities before collecting assessment data. These are also some of the benefits of curriculum alignment, right? Helps us to clarify our relationship to the rest of the institution, helps us to identify gaps, and helps us to exercise and be able to make those changes based on data. So again, this term is sometimes used interchangeably with curriculum mapping. Another really similar term that you might be kind of going off in your head here might be a student learning outcome framework. Again, lots of jargon is kind of being thrown at you right now. Curriculum alignment and curriculum mapping are different, again, but sometimes used interchangeably. Now, why is curriculum alignment important? It is important for a number of reasons. First, it clarifies expectations. So the alignment allows for clarification for students to know what is expected of them within their courses and what their faculty members expect them to learn. It also ensures developmental progression, improves communication among faculty, especially within a given program, improves program coherence, increases the likelihood that students achieve a program level outcome, and encourages reflective practice. So before we move on, curriculum alignment is important. I also want to acknowledge another term, backward curriculum design. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but put simply, backward curriculum design is when a course or program will start off by identifying the key learning outcomes, and then they design the entire program and all of the courses around those key outcomes to ensure that students are able to achieve them. This term comes up a lot when a new program is being designed at an institution. It also is sometimes a methodology that is used when you're taking a deep dive look at your program and wanting to make adjustments or modifications. Again, that's called the backward curriculum design. Whether you're designing it backward or forward, well-designed curricula are more than collections of independent courses. They are pathways for learning. This is a quote from the Association of American Colleges and Universities, also known as AAC&U. I love this quote. I think it really drives home exactly what curriculum alignment is and why we participated in it. The educational experience for our students should encourage, support, and reward students for mastering those program learning outcomes and course outcomes that we're setting out. We should be developing and offering this cohesive curricula, that are systematically aligned with our program and course outcomes. So why why think about curriculum development and why is it essential? So in their book, Skills for Successful School Leaders, Hoyle, English, and Steffi identified 4 reasons a systematic approach to curriculum development is essential. They're listed here for you. So the first is to ensure continuity of instruction within a school and among schools, to ensure progressive skill development among schools through continuity of instruction, to maximize the use of student time, avoid unnecessary instructional overlaps, prevent gaps, and thereby minimize boredom and ensure mastery of curriculum. The final one here is to provide a strong barrier against the problem of concentrating on one school or a level of school at the expense of the total system. Now, fully outright, I will say that this was designed with the K through 12 curriculum in mind. I still think that this applies really well to continuing education. I think that this is really what we should be focusing on as to the reasons why a systematic approach is essential. Now, we've talked a lot about curriculum alignment. Let's talk about curriculum mapping. And some of you probably came into this session thinking, aren't they the same? They are very similar. The only real difference is that curriculum mapping is the actual tool. It is the actual graphical illustration of the relationship between program and course learning outcomes. That's the big difference. So curriculum mapping is the actual process of identifying where specific learning outcome related content is taught in order to ensure that it is thoroughly addressed within the program. Curriculum mapping can provide a very large overview of a program and of an institution depending on how it's done and the student experience, including the identification of things like strengths and things like gaps in the program. It can also help us and suggest course sequencing. So there's a lot of benefit to curriculum mapping, but The process really helps us to rationalize the inclusion of specific courses within programs. It is really all about teaching and answers the questions of where, how often, and to what degree specific content is presented to students. It also, depending on how it's done, identifies the level of skill expected for student learning and work products. So again, that desired degree of learning. So not just where the learning is taking place, but also to what level or degree. Now, curriculum mapping, curriculum alignment, again, used interchangeably. I sometimes use them interchangeably still, but curriculum mapping is the actual tool for seeing those relationships between the different aspects of the institution, such as program and course outcomes. Now, curriculum mapping also focuses on connecting to the bigger picture. So curriculum alignment and curriculum mapping is all about connecting to the bigger picture and taking into consideration the levels kind of above and below you in the outcome development. Now, this is just an example. You may not have potentially department or division outcomes. We might just be thinking about institution outcomes, program outcomes, and course outcomes. But this is especially important to understand the way in which our items are aligned across an institution. So we know that we very much so, if we're looking at the arrow kind of going down on our left-hand side, institutional learning outcomes are a lot of times created first. And let's skip division and department for the purpose of this conversation. But program outcomes then are developed while looking at those institutional outcomes. So they should be based around what the institution is indicating a student should be able to do as a result of attending the institution, while looking at the holistic student. The outcomes, which I consider kind of course outcomes here, are looking to their programs to identify what their outcomes will be in order to ensure that they are fulfilling the program outcomes and that the program can fulfill the institutional outcomes. So you can see it kind of works in both ways, where it is kind of coming from the top down in terms of how we are creating our outcomes. The way in which we are fulfilling them is from the bottom up. So our course outcomes are really what's gathering a lot of that data that are fulfilling our program outcomes. The data from our courses at the program outcome are what are fulfilling our institutional outcomes. So again, alignment and mapping is all about connecting to the bigger picture. I want to take a really brief second because I also have a student affairs background, so I just feel like I want to do my due diligence in saying that co-curricular learning outcome frameworks are also very, very relevant in this conversation. So these are typically developed for student affairs. They also participate in, quote, curriculum mapping. This is an example from the University of Missouri. In the yellow, so the respect, responsibility, discover, and excellence, these are what the institutional learning outcomes are around. The pillars, so interpersonal development, civic engagement, practical competence, these are the columns at the University of Missouri within the Division of Student Affairs, which are kind of connecting all of these different institutional outcomes. So curriculum alignment does not just happen for the curricular side of the house, but it also does certainly happen in the co-curricular, especially as they are contributing more and more to student learning outcomes. So you're probably sitting there thinking, how is any of this helpful for me, potentially? I know we talk a lot about curriculum mapping and how it's helpful, so I kind of wanted to take a second and outline how curriculum mapping is helpful for programs, and then also how curriculum mapping is helpful specifically for courses. So, in thinking specifically about programs, it helps to, we've talked, I will admit that throughout our conversation already, and I say conversation, I'm pretending y'all are kind of in front of me talking, kind of nodding your heads, but we have identified a lot of items that are probably going to come up, both aligned to programs and courses, but I want to take a second and talk about each one of them independently in their clear kind of little buckets. So programs, it is helpful because it helps us identify gaps. It is going to help us in identifying student learning outcomes that are not currently addressed or potentially addressed minimally. Maybe they don't have enough exposure across our program. It is also a way to provide students with an overview of the role of each course and really provide, a logical rationale for why courses are sequenced the way that they are. It can help to identify the program's fit, again, within the division or the institution, much like we just talked about, all about that alignment. It can clarify and identify where evidence for program outcomes will be collected and how they can be collected. So these are known as, the methods, the measures, and the assessments. So we are really setting up a full framework in order to identify where we are going to receive the data in order to determine where our outcomes are being met and to what, or where our outcomes are being addressed and to potentially what degree. This also ensures students have enough opportunities to master the identified program outcomes. So this is really saying that if a program outcome is only addressed by one course, it is unlikely that a student is going to come away with achieving that outcome. We need to have kind of more saturation than that. It can also help to guide, these are things that are kind of a little bit more logistical, but it can help guide the department and program course scheduling. It can help you to understand as well as build staff capacity. And it can really help to communicate with your internal or external stakeholders. It can also help you finally in using your resources effectively. So a lot of different ways in which curriculum mapping is helpful at a program level. And for those of us who, are faculty members within a program, I think these are all things that we can also appreciate. Now, 3 important questions. Sorry, I skipped a little far. 3 important questions when examining programs. So when taking a look at the program in its entirety, we probably want to think about these following questions, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one of these. So for the first one, in which courses are students assessed on the concept identified in the student learning outcomes? So these may be the same courses where the concepts and skills are taught, but they may be assessed in other courses as well. So this is going to help us to bring that to light. So second one, do students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their competencies of the concepts? So, ideally, students should have more than one chance to show they understand a concept or really perform, a skill to an expected level of competency, whatever it might be. Again, it could be introduced, it could be reinforced, or it very well could be mastered depending on where they are at within the curricula. For students, multiple opportunities for assessment really mean that they can see their growth over time. That's a benefit for their students. They're able to reflect on the process then. For the program, thinking about multiple assessment opportunities allows us to track student growth as well. So, another benefit for participating in this for a program. Now, in the assessment, our third one here, do students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate? Oh, that's the same question. I copied it twice. No, the final question, I will adjust that. The final question is the assessment distributed throughout the program? So when you participate in assessment mapping, another keyword that we're going to go over in a little bit, this is going to allow us to determine specifically where assessments take place and if some courses are heavily loaded with assessment of learning outcomes while others are kind of skipped. So it's not enough to just kind of create the curriculum map and identify all of these different learning outcomes and where they are addressed throughout courses. We also need to ensure that we are assessing those outcomes in order to gather the results of our course and program outcomes. Now, switching gears for a second here, how is curriculum mapping helpful for faculty members? So it can help in designing a course syllabi. It can help in aligning curricula to professional standards. It really helps to identify, again, how it fits into that larger institutional vision in the program. It helps to identify important assignments that will support your outcome statements and the achievement of them. It can also bring up the question of, do students receive adequate introduction to practice in and have the ability to be reinforced in a specific skill before we are really expecting them to demonstrate, essentially the mastery of it if we're using the introduced, reinforced, and mastered degrees of learning. We also want to think about how curriculum mapping can bring about conversations and allow faculty members to share and talk through their different teaching practices and concerns with their colleagues and their peers. It also can allow faculty members to really teach to their strengths. So not every faculty member needs to cover every program outcome in every single course. So we can think about how to align it appropriately to the strengths of our faculty members. So I think as a faculty member, that is probably, something that can be exciting. And we're also going to talk, we also want there to be autonomy, right? So not everything has to be identical or the same, even if you're teaching the same course. Again, it's all about strengths. Now, let's talk briefly about curriculum maps as a part of faculty discussions. So here are 4 questions that you can kind of go through in order to begin the conversation of curriculum mapping. So do students receive adequate introduction to, practice in, and reinforcement of skills before they're expected to demonstrate mastery? Should any courses or learning outcomes be restructured to improve frequency and depth of practice for students? Are learning outcomes addressed in logical order, allowing for students to progress from introduction levels to mastery levels? Do all required courses contribute to at least one program level student learning outcome?